This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's January 21st, 2025. On this day, in 1525, a group of Swiss Christians broke the law by baptizing each other in a home, starting what would become known as the Anabaptist movement, a precursor to today's Amish and Mennonite churches. Some of the people who took part in that baptism were later exiled, arrested, or even executed for the crime of carrying out religious activity that violated norms. 10 years later to the day, on January 21st, 1535, in Paris, another group of Protestants faced persecutions at the hands of the French government. The king himself took part in a procession through the streets designed to intimidate anyone who questioned the Catholic Church, culminating in an execution. 6 Protestants were burned that day at the stake for being heretics. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. Sometimes, growing up in the evangelical church, I would hear people say, everyone's out to get Christians, that we were hated by the world. Looking back at history reminds me that true persecution takes a much different form than anything we experienced. And it's a reminder of how many protections we have in this modern age, and specifically in the United States, to hold whatever religious views and beliefs we choose. There's a very good reason why the First Amendment establishes religious liberty. Without it, it's all too easy to end up with a situation where the state kills people because they got baptized the wrong way. But what happens when the people who belong to religious organizations feel that their other rights and liberties have been violated in the context of their faith group? Well, that's at the heart of a court ruling that came out last week, one that did not go the way the Southern Baptist Convention hoped, and one that potentially sets a precedent for other lawsuits in the works against the Nashville-based denomination. This case was brought by an East Tennessee pastor who was accused of sexual assault. He alleges the SBC mishandled the claims against him. The particulars hinge on the way church officials made decisions in closed-door meetings, and the denomination argued to a state appeals court that those procedures should stay private. One argument from the church's lawyers was that internal church disciplinary practices are exempt from court oversight. They cited a legal concept called the ecclesiastical abstention doctrine. It's a sort of extrapolation of the First Amendment. The idea is that judges should refuse to hear cases against religious groups if those cases would amount to government sticking its nose into church business. The court disagreed. The ruling cites several examples of other cases where judicial panels sorted out which disputes qualify for ecclesiastical protection and which ones don't. Bottom line, courts are supposed to stay out of anything to do with doctrine or theology, the actual religious beliefs of a group. But when things veer into safety or HR, well, that's a legal matter, and the secular court does have jurisdiction. The pastor's case against the SBC is set to go to trial. Now, one tricky piece of this is that the pastor is claiming defamation, not just because the church determined he'd done wrong, but also because he was publicly named as someone believed to have committed some kind of sexual malpractice. That disclosure is exactly what critics of the church have called for. Victim advocates say there needs to be some kind of mechanism to inform congregations if someone applying to be a pastor has lost their position at another church due to abusive behavior. The outcome of the case could have far-reaching implications for how the Baptist Church moves forward, or doesn't, with planned reforms. On the other hand, the SBC is also facing lawsuits from victims of sexual abuse who claim the denomination didn't adequately respond to their complaints. And the appeals court decision saying the denomination can't expect to be shielded from judicial review could help ease the way for their cases to be heard. In just a few minutes, how WNXP's Nashville Artist of the Month is charting a course that's thoroughly her own. That's coming up after the newscast.
Nashville Public Radio is always here to keep you informed, whether it's the latest news or music you should check out. Every week, What Where Wednesdays shares the latest happenings taking place right here in Nashville by talking to members of our community, putting on events in your neighborhood and beyond. So tune in to What Were Wednesdays every Wednesday, and you can always find events at WNXP.org/events.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. More than 100 people gathered at Nashville's Public Square Park downtown on Saturday to protest the incoming Trump administration. Last time Trump was inaugurated 8 years ago, Joe Crump and her mom, Lizzie Buchanan, marched downtown. This year, they showed up again wearing rainbow hats and carrying colorfully painted signs.
I think it's important to be out here in Tennessee because we don't get represented by our representatives very often. So we have to show up and show that the South isn't some backwards place, that we care. We really do.
We're changing. Absolutely. This isn't the South I grew up in.
Yeah.
Buchanan says that she never thought women would lose access to rights like reproductive health care. As the mother of 2 queer children, she says she's going to keep showing up to ensure the rights of her kids and other LGBTQ kids don't get taken away. Extremely cold weather has hit Nashville again, prompting a greater need for shelters to house people experiencing homelessness. This comes after recent concern over how the city-operated shelter is running. WPLN's Cynthia Abrams reports.
Sheltering in Nashville primarily falls to nonprofits and churches, like the Rescue Mission or Room in the Inn. But when it gets really cold, like when it's freezing or below for at least 3 straight hours, Metro steps in. They run an emergency overflow shelter. It's open overnight, which can leave people vulnerable during the day, especially if, in the case of snow, libraries or other warm public places close. In some cases, the city shelter will extend its hours. But at times, the Office of Homeless Services has been stretched and relies on volunteers to stay open. One reason for this? Agency Director April Calvin says Metro hasn't found a contractor interested in running it.
2 years in a row, that RFP went out fully funded, averaging about 40 nights of emergency sheltering with the building that's attached. And there was 0 takers for 2 years in a row.
After this winter, Calvin says Metro will resume the search for an operator. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
The emergency shelter was open 24/7 this past weekend. Officials are continuing to monitor weather throughout this week. Concrete, plastic, electricity, chemicals. These things are produced at large facilities like power plants and factories, and they all have something in common. They create a lot of planet-warming pollution. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency tracked the self-reported emissions of Tennessee's biggest facilities in 2023. WPLN's Caroline Eggers breaks it down.
The Tennessee Valley Authority has long been the single biggest climate polluter in the state. In fact, TVA caused more than 60% of all emissions from large facilities, thanks to its coal and gas plants. The utilities' power plants make up most of the top 10 list. That list also contains a chemical plant, an oil refinery, and a cement plant. Statewide, the vast majority of emissions from facilities come from fossil fuels. Take the Eastman Chemical Plant, which ranked 3rd in the state. About 94% of its emissions came from fossil fuel burning and petrochemical production.
Tennessee's total climate pollution from facilities has dropped by about 1/5 in the past decade, mostly due to coal retirements. Beyond coal, the state will not significantly reduce emissions further without gas retirements at factories and power plants. The Tennessee Titans have a new general manager. The team announced over the weekend that Mike Borgonzi will be its new GM. Borgonzi comes from the Kansas City Chiefs, spending 16 seasons with the team, most recently as the assistant general manager. He's inheriting a team in need of rebuilding. The Titans ended the season tied for last in the NFL, earning the team first pick in the upcoming draft. Ascend Amphitheater turns 10 this year. Live Nation, which operates the Metro-controlled venue, is nearing the end of its lease. As other bidders vie for the contract, WPLN's Justin Barney reports that Live Nation touted last year's accomplishments to the Metro Parks Board.
Last year, Ascend put on 30 shows with over 150,000 attendees. More than half were not from Nashville. They were tourists spending their money in the city. Live Nation also explained that Ascend generated over $3 million for the city and state through taxes, rent, seat fees, and other charitable contributions. That is just a tiny fraction of the amount of money that Metro spent to build the amphitheater 10 years ago, which was $52 million. Justin Barney, WPLN News.
Live Nation's contract expires at the end of 2025. Metro is taking bids for the next operator. Nashville business leader, philanthropist, and historian Ridley Wills has died. Wills grew up in a family with ties to some of the city's most notable figures and places, including Belmead Plantation and the Governor's Mansion. He served briefly in the Navy, then worked at the insurance company his grandfather co-founded, National Life and Accident, the firm that's also known for starting WSM Radio and the Grand Ole Opry. In 1983, Wills turned his attention to chronicling local history. He published dozens of books on topics such as Nashville's major thoroughfares. He specialized in the small details of the past that are often skipped over in accounts of major events and movements. Many of his books methodically collected and reproduced information otherwise found only in a handful of disparate archival sources. And in doing so, he made countless small points of the city's history much easier for enthusiasts to find and understand. Wills was a guest on WPLN's This Is Nashville and contributed to several of this newsroom's stories about local history. He maintained an extensive personal archive of documents and vintage postcards. About a decade ago, Wills began the process of carefully splitting up that collection, donating the materials to local libraries in the communities most relevant to the items. As a philanthropist, Wills played a major role in several historic preservation efforts and was a significant supporter of the Downtown Presbyterian Church and the Contributor, and he also wrote a column on local history for the street newspaper. Ridley Wills died at home on Thursday. He'll be remembered with a service at First Presbyterian Church on Friday. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. The British-born, Nashville-based artist Yola has a new EP called My Way. That's a fitting title for the work of a singer and songwriter who's resisted labels that others have put on her throughout her career. WNXP's Marquise Munson talked with the Nashville Artist of the Month about showing another side of herself musically.
Most people only know a little bit about Yola's backstory.
I've talked kind of almost exhaustively about my mother's record collection, how diverse it was. And that's why it got me into everything from like rock and roll to country to soul to funk.
Yola also let it be known that diving back into that music and starting to write it herself became a part of her grieving process after her mom died in 2013. The country soul sound she perfected brought her a breakthrough in the U.S. and a 2019 Grammy nomination for Best New Artist.
But weirdly enough, I've actually never really gone into any details as to what I did as a professional musician before I moved to America. Like almost absolutely nothing.
Yola launched her career in London as a part of the broken beat scene and singing with influential groups like Massive Attack and Bugs in the Attic. With her skills as a vocalist and songwriter, she was able to move into different sonic spaces with ease. Even though that work brought her to stadium stages, there was still more that she could do and wanted to do. She explored her rootsy side while writing and recording in Nashville with producer Dan Arbach. Once she established herself in the Americana space, she landed a big screen role playing Sister Rosetta Tharpe in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis. The film portrays Elvis as a man controlled by competing interests, and it made Yola reflect on her own experiences in the music industry.
I always kind of liken it to the movie Get Out, where like people want to step into your skin and ride you around like a skin suit whilst you're on the upside down. And honestly, that's been a lot of my life. That's been a lot of people that look at me and you can see the fangs dripping and the eyes glistening with anticipation as to how they can take my body for a ride. Consent be damned.
Yola found herself inspired by how some of her artist peers outside of the Americana space use their freedom. Watching Childish Gambino headline a festival and callback not only to his love of Parliament and Funkadelic on Awaken My Love, but the music that she made when she was just starting out. And then she revisited the influences she put aside when her mom passed.
Almost to date, 10 years since she passed, I went into the studio to start recording My Way and put my foot on the path of like direction away from, I suppose, grief as a core tenement of my process and into a new life. And so it felt really good to kind of step back to where I started, professionally speaking, and start looking at like why I was drawn to that scene and why I was drawn to that music.
Her fans haven't been surprised at this quote-unquote sonic shift because they've been experiencing it with her at her live shows.
You'll notice that like some of the covers that I was doing are freakishly similar to what I'm doing now. 3+ years ago, I was covering Yarborough People's Don't Stop the Music. I was covering Anita Baker, Sweet Love, you name it. Like, I've been really unsubtly signposting the entire time.
Don't you stop it, don't you stop, don't stop the music.
The old electronic soul touchdowns of her past influences came through in the bass lines and drum patterns she came up with on the EP's first single, Future Enemies.
There weren't lyrics yet, but I just had like a feeling and I had a melody. So I took that to Sean Douglas and Zach Skelton in LA. And I was like, so I've got this like bass line. It goes like this. And then I was like, let's find it on the keyboard. Okay, it's kind of like this, right? But you can play that better. Okay, you do that. And now there's a drum pad. And so we were just a trio of co-writers, co-producers, co-mixers, co-everything.
Yola has chosen to chart her own path, and the new EP called, appropriately, My Way is her tribute to that.
I've had to make a choice between the industry and the fan. And what a lot of people do is they choose the industry. They choose to pigeonhole themselves and say, I'm all in this and I'm just this. And then the environment of the industry in that regard rewards them for pigeonholing themselves. And I chose to go exactly against that. And as a result, maybe I have yielded less from the institutions of the world because of me being truly authentic to myself. But my fans know I don't lie.
Marquise Munson, WNXP.
We do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who have left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. That little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported, and you can make a donation at WPLN.org. Well, that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one. And we'll catch back up tomorrow.